So, this past weekend, as most of you guys know, Cedric Doumbe made his debut in the PFL, and he made an absolute statement, getting a 9-second knockout after taunting his opponent the entire week leading up to the fight, saying how he was going to sleep him, and he even walked out with a bed, taunting the guy the whole time. It was a great performance by Cedric, had lots of people talking. There was even superstars such as Kylian Mbappe was there. And I think the fight was in Ireland, but it was in Europe, and it was headlined by two French guys. And I think Kylian Mbappe wanted to go see Cedric Doumbe fight, and man, did he make a statement. He knocked the guy out in no time, looked great, stiffed him, had a great interview, promoted himself very well, and I think that he really showed. I think he wanted to show the UFC that they dropped the ball on him, and he did. Now, before he transitioned to mixed martial arts, he was widely considered one of the top pound-for-pound kickboxers in the world, similar to Alex Pereira. Before Alex Pereira transitioned over to MMA full-time, he was considered one of, if not the top pound-for-pound kickboxers. Cedric has a win over UFC fighter Brad Riddell in kickboxing. Now, I know that Brad Riddell is not a world beater in the UFC, but he's still a UFC fighter who has fought guys like Fiziev, Moicano. He's been there and done that, and he's a striker. And Cedric Doumbe outstruck him in a kickboxing fight. Did go to split decision, though. And yeah, like I said before, he just made a statement in the PFL, showed his power, his speed, his fight IQ. And his opponent wasn't the best, but it was only his 5th pro fight, and it's kind of similar to Bo Nickel, where Bo Nickel's only had like 5 pro fights, so you can't really give him somebody too good when he hasn't even had he's only had 5 fights. You know what I mean? So it's good to build these guys up slowly, not give them too much, not kill them too early on. Try and build them up gradually. And he's 31 years old, but he will be 33 by the time he can sign with the UFC. And 33 is not over welterweight. It might seem like it is, but Hamza Chimaev is the only person in the top 5 of welterweight who's under 35 years old, and he's a very young prospect. Most ranked welterweights are around that age, of around 33 or a little older even. But yeah, he showed some decent ground game in some of his previous fights against some of his regional opponents, even defending leg locks and defending takedowns, and he ended up in half guard, landing some elbows on top. And it was against a regional opponent, but at least it shows that he has somewhat of a concept of grappling. It shows that he's been working his grappling. If he's able to sprawl, able to defend leg locks, able to get on top in half guard, and know to throw elbows in half guard. It shows that at least he's taking it very seriously and is training grappling regularly. And as far as how far I think he could go, I think in general he could definitely be a ranked UFC welterweight based off his striking alone. But unless he was fast-tracked to a title shot like Pereira, he would have to face some serious grapplers who wouldn't stay with him. And he wouldn't be fast-tracked to a title shot like Pereira because there's no backstory between him and Leon Edwards or him and Colby Covington. There would be no reason to fast-track him to the title shot. You know what I mean? But I do think he could beat guys like Neil Magny. You know what I mean? But I don't know. That would even be a test for a guy like him, a grappler like Neil Magny. But when you get inside the top 10, guys like Brady, Rakhmonov, Chimaev, Covington, Usman, Leon, I think that these guys would definitely have their way with Cedric Doumbe. Now, this was not this past weekend, but it was recently when Johnny Eblin, the self-proclaimed best middleweight in the world, he stirred up controversy recently by knocking out Leon Edwards' brother, then spitting on him, and then getting into an altercation with Leon in the cage. Now, that was a bit of a controversial thing. I wasn't too happy to see Eblen spit on Fabian Edwards after he knocked him out, but what can you do? Some guys, that adrenaline's pumping, and they act first, think later. He's also beaten Anatoly Tomkov, who's a very experienced guy, master of sport and hand-to-hand combat, and he's also trained by Fedor, so he's that guy's legit. I mean, I know he isn't a huge name, but that's an impressive win. He also beat Gegard Mousasi, who, even though he was 36 when he fought him, Gegard was on a 4-fight win streak and was the defending Bellator champion. And these were not close fights. Eblin won 50-45s across the board against Gegard, and he had a 50-45 against Tokov as well. And on the other 2 scorecards, he only lost 1 round. So he's not having close fights with these guys. He's absolutely washing them. Which, as I say in my old videos, if you're getting matchups that may not be that favorable for you, thinking that this guy's not on my level, then instead of going out there and just having a point fighting with him, go out there and show the levels. Show that you're a level above him. If you're given a matchup that you think, I could get a better guy than this, so we can go out and absolutely dominate this guy and show the matchmakers that no, this is not the kind of matchup that I need. I need a better matchup. I need better guys closer to the title. I mean, I know that was a title fight, but still. His wrestling background, coupled with his cardio and his pressure, it's going to make him a force to be reckoned with. He wears guys down with his wrestling and pace, and he just grinds them out over the course of the fight. He showed he has legit 5-round cardio, and he has the wrestling ability to back it up, which those two things alone, we see with guys like Colby Covington, can bring you very far. Just having wrestling and cardio, and pushing the pace on guys, and having good enough striking to where you can survive on the feet. I would say Colby Covington is a pretty good striker. His kickboxing is pretty good, but still, his bread and butter is his wrestling and his cardio and his pace. Eblin has 3 more fights on his contract, so we'll see how he looks by the end of it, but we also have to take into consideration that Bellator is probably going to be going under soon, so we don't know what's going to happen there. But honestly, I could see him beating guys like Chris Curtis or Jack Hermanson, or possibly even a guy like Marvin Vettori if he was to come to the UFC and be given a top 5 guy right away. So yeah, I think Johnny Eblin is very, very, very hot prospect. I think his well-rounded style and his cardio is going to make him a problem in the middleweight division. And people say that he trains with Sean Strickland. People say that he gives Sean Strickland troubles in sparring. So who knows? I mean, I know styles make fights, but still, he seems to be very legit. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is Vadim Nemkov, the defending Bellator champion, coming off back-to-back wins over former ranked UFC light heavyweights in Corey Anderson and Yoel Romero. He also has wins over guys like Phil Davis and Ryan Bader. Now, these guys were both not peak prime guys, but they were around the UFC rankings in their day and were legit top light heavyweights. Romero also fought for a UFC title on multiple occasions, and he should have won the interim belt against Rockhold, but he missed weight. Nemkov is well-rounded like Eblen, but I'd say he's a better striker because he almost knocked out Corey Anderson with a spinning back kick in their rematch. But one thing that people like to talk about is he was losing pretty handedly to Anderson in their first fight before the no contest, but I argue that he did end up beating Anderson handedly as well in their rematch. So it could have been either an off night or just Nemkov's just still improving drastically in between fights, which you love to see with these young guys. He does have a loss to ex-UFC champ Yuri, who's fighting for the belt in his next fight. But it was a loss due to exhaustion because it was a 10-minute round in the tournament. It's not like Yuri went out there and completely outstruck the guy and dominated him in terms of skill. Like, yeah, Yuri was definitely winning and was definitely outskilling the guy. But at the end of the day, a lot of that loss had to do with exhaustion and not just Yuri being better. And I'm not saying that he would have beat Yuri. Yuri probably would have beat him anyways. But that's why it's a first-round TKO loss, because of exhaustion. And like I said with Eblen, I could see him coming in and beating top 15 guys, possibly even top 10 guys, but he just signed in with the deal with Bellator too, so we'll have to see now that these guys are going now that Bellator's going under. But yeah, I could see Vadim coming in and beating guys like Ryan Spann, guys like Anthony Smith. I think he would have a pretty good chance against those guys. I think those guys are decent fighters, but they're kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none kind of guy. Like they're decent everywhere, but they're not really good anywhere. I would say that Smith is a pretty good grappler, so that's where his bread and butter is, but I wouldn't even call him like a world beater grappler, you know what I mean? So now let's go over historically how a Bellator champion's done in the UFC, right? Historically, Bellator champions coming over to the UFC have not done too well. A good example of this is Hector Lombard, who in his prime was an absolute beast. He was 24-0 overall, 8-0 overall in Bellator, and was the defending Bellator champion when he signed to the UFC. And he had his debut fight against Tim Boesch, who was no world beater, and he lost that fight by split decision, which was controversial at the time. And then he would string together a few decent wins after that over the likes of Jake Shields. You know, that's a legit guy. But then he popped for a drug test and ended his UFC career 3-8 after returning from that suspension. And the most notable fight he had was probably when he got knocked out cold by Dan Henderson. So, yeah, he didn't have a great UFC career. An actual successful example, though, would be Eddie Alvarez. He's the only man, I think, to win belts in both Bellator and the UFC. He lost his UFC debut to Cowboy, but then he strung back-to-back wins over Anthony Pettis and Gilbert Melendez, which earned him a title shot at then-champion Rafael dos Anjos, who he infamously knocked out in the first round to become the UFC undisputed light heavyweight champion. But then, as probably you all know, he was even more infamously knocked out himself by Conor McGregor to make Conor McGregor the two-division world champion. He was then had a fight with Dustin Poirier, which went to a no contest because of a illegal knee, and then after that he knocked out Gaethje, but then he was finished by Poirier and left the UFC, ending his UFC career with a record of 4-3-1. Not too bad at all whatsoever, especially when you look at who he lost to, like prime Cowboy, prime Poirier. Like, these are legitimate guys. You know what I mean? So, no shame losing to those guys. But was he the world beater in the UFC that he was in Bellator? No, he wasn't. And then the worst example is probably Ben Askren, who he wasn't signed to Bellator when he joined the UFC, so I don't know, you might not count it as a Bellator champ going to the UFC, but he was still undefeated, and he was the ex-Bellator champ, and he had never lost his belt. You know what I mean? Like, he had never lost. So in his debut, he fought Robbie Lawler and was getting absolutely manhandled in the first minute of that fight. And then he ended up getting a controversial stoppage by way of bulldog choke, where Robbie Lawler looked like he was out, but he wasn't, and it was all weird, but it still counts as a sub for Ben. And then in his next fight, he took on Jorge Masvidal, where he was notoriously knocked out in 5 seconds with a flying knee, stiffed him cold. And then that fight basically sums up his UFC run, because after that he fought Damian Maia, and overall his UFC run was more negative than positive. He had a pretty uneventful UFC career, unfortunately, for him. And recently we have Michael Chandler, who wasn't the Bellator champ when he came in. He had lost to Pitbull, but he was coming off a brutal first-round KO over former UFC champ Benson Henderson. And before that, he had held the Bellator strap. He won his debut against Dan Hooker by knockout, but then was finished by Charles Oliveira for the UFC title in his next fight. And he has since gone 1-2 in the promotion, being finished by Dustin Poirier. And his only win is over an aging Tony Ferguson, who dropped him in the first round. So overall, Bellator champions have not done too well in the UFC historically when they come over. Eddie Alvarez is the only guy who was the Bellator champion, came over and won the UFC belt, and he didn't even do that right away. He lost to Donald Cerrone. So like, nobody's ever came in to the UFC from Bellator as the champion and immediately just started kicking ass. You know what I mean? It just never happened. So I don't know. Will we see Eblen and Nemkov do it? I don't think so. Maybe they could. But I don't see either of them coming in and just becoming the UFC champion off rip. I think if anything, they would have a similar path to Alvarez, where they would maybe get a win or two over like ranked guys, and then immediately get like or Alvarez lost his debut, but I think they both, like, if they came to the UFC, they'd get a medium ranked guy, win, get a top 5 guy, probably lose, and then eventually they might rebound from that and then become champion. But yeah. I just wanted to talk about this because of all the talk regarding these guys, regarding outside the UFC, you know. And yeah, I'll be dropping another video later this week doing my breakdowns and predictions for the upcoming UFC card, Grant Dawson versus Bobby Green. And I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.